What is up? Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. I am Marcus Grant, joined as always by Dwayne McFarland, and we are headlong into week 10. The double-digit weeks have come. We are closer to the end of the fantasy season than we are to the beginning. So, this is the first day of the rest of our fantasy lives for 2022. Dwayne, how are we feeling going into this 10th week?
Feeling good for the most part. I think we've helped a lot of people here. We've definitely, Dwayne, I've definitely had some misses. The OJ Howard one definitely stands out. I know specifically, Jordan, our producer here, he's not on air right now, but I know he went all in on OJ Howard one week because of me. I feel kind of bad about that. I think he scored 0 points. But I think we've done a pretty nice job, and all we can do is follow the data, right? I mean, the data does not always tell us the truth, and sometimes coaches change their mind, circumstance change. There's some nuance to the way all these things work out. But yeah, man, I feel good, and I mean, how can we not be excited? Like, we've only got a couple of weeks to make sure that we are in the fantasy playoffs in our leagues, and trade deadlines are probably here for most leagues. They may be today, or tomorrow. Before the Sunday kicks. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Absolutely an exciting time. And yeah, I'm sure, we've gotten some things wrong, but I hope we have educated a lot of folks. I know sometimes people get frustrated when you hear your process over results, but it really is true that at least if you have an idea and you have a logic for what you're doing, it's going to make sense, even if the numbers don't turn out the way you want. So, I know we get to Sunday and we do the whole process thing, and somebody gives you 4 points and you're salty because you didn't get the result you want. But I hope, if nothing else, we have sort of changed the way people think and hopefully cleared some things up and help you get better about putting things together on a weekly basis. We will help again today as we go through the rankings for the week. You can check those out in full at fantasylife.com. Dwayne and Waz have their rankings up, so you can go take a look at those. And we'll talk about the possible return of Odell Beckham Jr. There have been a lot of rumors about him being available, and maybe he lands down in Dallas. We'll dive into that a little bit as well. But let's start in Buffalo, where Josh Allen is dealing with an elbow injury, a UCL sprain that has him questionable for this week. Sean McDermott really trying to pour any water on any alarm, any concern that there might be long-term over Josh Allen. But Dwayne, there is a chance he does not play this week against the Minnesota Vikings. If it is indeed Case Keenum, how do you feel, one, about Keenum, although we're probably not starting him unless we have to, but more importantly, how do we feel about, say, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you're not having to start him. Keenum, he always has I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for him, because a few years ago I was playing over at the FFPC, and I had a team that I was fortunate enough at the very end in the Football Guys Players Championship. It was down to me and another team, playing for $250,000, and I lost. I only won 30. Yes, it was a rough night. By less than a point, I lost. But Keenum was my quarterback that year because everybody I had been hurt, and I just had to pick up somebody late season. And he came through with several big games. This was when he was with the Vikings. Mm-hmm. And guess who he was throwing the ball to? It was Stephon Diggs. So Stephon Diggs. Adam Thielen was a bit younger, at the time, and so he was really, playing well. That was actually the year, if you remember, I believe that was the year that was the walk-off win against the Saints in the playoffs.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where they had the big play, at the end of the game, and it was just okay, deuces, we're out of here. So Keenum, for Stephon Diggs purposes, I think he'll be okay. Obviously, we would rather have Josh Allen, because Josh Allen can attack all areas of the field. Case Keenum is going to be much more of a, manage the game, hit the short to intermediate throws, anticipate a deep throw here or there, right? But Josh Allen, the thing you get with him is on any play, at any point in the play, he could just decide, oh, yeah, you go, you take off deep, and I'm just going to hit you for 80. That thing, that's gone, right? So it really hurts Gabe Davis, in my opinion, more than it does Stephon Diggs. But not to say that Gabe Davis still can't come through with a game. He's just not going to have a chance to hit some of those big home run balls, or at least as many, right? And if he does, it'll come in a different fashion. Honestly, though, I would say if Josh Allen really is hurting, I know it's tough for Josh Allen managers to hear this, but I think you prefer just let Keenum play a game or two. Because the last thing you want, man, and for the Bills too, the last thing you want is something to be aggravated and this last all season for Josh Allen. We're fortunate that it was just a sprain, and that it wasn't a tear. And so my thought is, like, if he's not going to be 100%, or if he's going to just be 70% and he's going to have a risk of re-injury, now 70% Josh Allen's fine. You're going to start him if you have him. Like, it doesn't matter. I put him at QB3 this week just to slightly bring him down, just because there's a chance he gets hurt in the game. There's a chance they really alter the game plan, because they're one of the most pass-heavy teams in the league. I would expect them to try to change that, whether they go with Keenum or whether they go with Josh Allen. But I would prefer they just go ahead and start Case Keenum. Even the few teams I have Josh Allen on, it's like, fine, I'll bench him. We'll talk about a streamer or two here in a minute that you can go grab if that's happening to you, that's available typically. But those are my thoughts. The rest of the offense really isn't that involved anyway. I mean, Isaiah McKenzie showed a little bit last week, but I mean, there's really not anything else that people are probably just going to be like, oh my God, like, this is killing my team. What are your thoughts on it?
No, I think, well, the thing I think that is a positive, and you talk about Josh Allen maybe just sitting if he is not 100%. The Bills have been very cautious about their guys that are sort of banged up, because they are playing for January. They're playing for February. So they have not really made it a point to risk things here in October, November. I think we saw that last week where they sat a number of guys in their secondary in that game against the Jets. And look, not to take anything away from the Jets, they played a really good game, but the Bills also felt like, you know what, we're willing to potentially sacrifice this one for the greater good and for the long-term health of our guys. So that decision maybe is going to be made for us if Sean McDermott decides they're just going to hold Josh Allen out a week. I do think that Stephon Diggs is the guy that you can sort of lean on, because whoever the quarterback is, they're going to be smart enough to know to get the ball in his hands. Maybe you take a shot on Isaiah McKenzie or Dawson Knox, just thinking that if Keenum's really going to pepper that intermediate part of the field, those guys get a little more action. But I don't think you're forced to play either one of them. So this may just be Stephon Diggs, and you wait and see for everybody else until Josh Allen comes back. But I do think we can all sort of breathe easier. As you mentioned, it's a sprain. It's not a tear. He's not going to have any major surgery, maybe just a couple weeks of rest, and then we're okay, because the last thing you want is something major to happen. And now you're without Josh Allen for the rest of the year, or you have Josh Allen operating at like 75%, which is not optimal for anybody.
Maybe they'll just play him at running back.
You know what? They could definitely do that. Just keep using him as the goal line back, which, I guess at this point, if you got Devin Singletary, you sort of know the deal, so you're not really going to have your feelings hurt about it.
Exactly.
Maybe that's the thing. Seems like a good way, though, to pivot to the rankings that you can go check out at fantasylife.com, and you talk about some potential streaming options. I don't know that Justin Fields is a streaming option anymore. I mean, right now, at least the way he's playing, he's just a straight up start. You've got him at QB4. He's the QB1 over the last 4 weeks. He is running. I think he has more rushing yards in the last month than Najee Harris and Leonard Fournette have all season long. The question is, can he keep climbing the ladder? Does he get above QB4 at some point? Are we talking about him as the QB1 in the near future?
Man, it's in the range of outcomes, and this is why we talk, so much and focus so much on the dual threat quarterbacks. Because, like, if you look at Justin Fields, he's still not even averaging 200 yards passing a game. It doesn't matter. Like, when people go to the, he can't throw for enough yards argument, I like just point to things like, well, remember Taysom Hill? Like, in the games where he played, like, he's a top 6 quarterback. He can barely throw a forward pass. Like, it's really awkward watching Taysom Hill, which is so funny. How does Sean Payton ever think that was really his quarterback of the future? And I like Taysom Hill. He's a good player. He can do a lot of things. But it's so funny when you hear those stories, right, of Troy Aikman and Joe Buck, talking back to whenever they met with, Sean Payton, and they just got Taysom Hill off the practice squad, and like he's told him he's in the building. And they're like, what? Who? Like, this guy we just grabbed off the wire. Who's in the building? Our quarterback of the future, But, Sean Payton's such a tinkerer, right? He's thinking of all these different things, that he could be doing with a player like that, and he was right. So, but back to Justin Fields, the point being, if you can run the ball, there's a lot of good things that can happen for you. And that's why you just can't, it's tough to give up on these players. And I think that's a lesson for me, even, Marcus, because Now it can still be tough. Like, early in the season, like, the Bears were playing really bad, so I did drop Justin Fields in several leagues because I had to have someone to start. I moved to Geno Smith or someone like that. But I'm gonna be even more conservative about that approach in the future. Like, I even when I did it, like, I was like, man, like, I know this could really bite me later, because he has the profile that if things go right, it could be really well. But to your
Mhm.
point, 28.1 points per game over the last 4. That's the number 2. That's the number 2 quarterback. He's point 1 behind Patrick Mahomes. So you're feeling pretty good about Justin Fields. 12.3 rushing attempts per game for 102 yards over the last 4 games. And that's really the 4 games where the Bears have made the switch. And this is something we talked about in the offseason. If the Bears were to integrate him into the design running game, like we see with Lamar Jackson, like we see with Jalen Hurts, that was really the key that could open up these potential, 12 to 15 rushing attempt games for Justin Fields. And that's exactly what's happened. That they've finally decided to integrate him in. He's essentially their running back 2 right now. Like
Mhm.
he's getting just as much run, if not more, than Khalil Herbert. So I feel like things also point to continuing. Marcus, your question, like can he stay here? I think he probably can. I think the other factor working in his favor, and we've mentioned this before, is he runs the Bears run the ball all the time. They don't care.
Mhm.
Like if they're trailing, so when they trail by 4+ points, they run the ball 47% of the time. That's 3rd in the NFL. Trailing, like they still run the ball almost half the time, trailing, right? In a close game, they're 5th in the league. And then when leading, they're 2nd as far as their rush rate versus, the NFL average. So I think there's a lot of positive things. And then lastly, like you now get Chase Claypool. So he'll have another game to be integrated. I think there's an opportunity for the passing game to even see a slight uptick as well. I think Justin Fields, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think it's tough to say he's not a QB6, at least QB6. He's in the top 6 the rest of the way.
He's one of the guys, and there have been a couple of them this year that have sort of forced us to reevaluate all of our quarterback rankings. I mean, he's one, Geno Smith is one. What I've been saying about Justin Fields, because we always talk about the rushing quarterback and the rushing upside, and I think you hit on an argument that people make, is that, well, he doesn't throw the ball enough and he doesn't pick up enough yards. And so I've started to kind of translate what that rushing ability means in terms of passing yards, right? So let's say you've got Justin Fields, who's averaging, just for the sake of easy math, let's call it 200 passing yards a game, but he's also running for 67 yards a game. Well, that extrapolates out to about another 170 passing yards in terms of what you get for fantasy production. So now you take that with the 200 actual passing yards you're talking about a guy who's given you 350, 375 passing yards. So then you're talking about those upper echelon quarterbacks in terms of their passing ability. You're talking about the Mahomeses, Justin Herbert, when everything is right there for the Chargers. And I think that maybe starts to put a better spin on it. Maybe makes it more clear for people.
Yeah, I like that.
So when people say, "Hey, look, he doesn't throw it enough," well, you extrapolate those rushing yards to what it means for passing yardage, and I think that makes it a little bit easier for people to sort of digest.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And from a season long perspective, like that was kind of the thing with Jalen Hurts last year when people were doubting. I was like, well, if he runs for 800 yards and say scores 5 or 6 touchdowns, he has 100 points before he throws a pass. Like
Mhm.
the top quarterbacks are 300 points. So can he get another 200 passing? Yeah. I mean, yeah, dude, I love the way that you just explained that. I think that's the perfect way to get people to understand. Cause I do think sometimes our brain gets stuck more in NFL terms
Mhm.
than fantasy. Right.
Yeah.
And really in NFL terms, even like Kevin Cole, a lot of people, from Kevin Cole over at PFF and some other folks have really been talking about how valuable that the quarterbacks that can run are becoming, and like the expected points added on these scramble plays, because what are they doing? They're picking up first downs whenever they should be stopped, because defenses are evolving, taking away the big plays. Well, one way to offset that is if you're going to have everybody deep and you got a guy like Justin Fields, that can run, he's like a running back. Not just anybody can tackle this guy. Like there's different ways offenses can create problems, and to be honest, right now with the transition the league's going through, this kind of offense might be the ideal offense to deal with the way coverages are playing.
It really might be. And I think the other part, just from a more basic level, is it forces the defense to play 11 on 11. You don't just have a quarterback who's standing there where you know where he's going to be the whole time, and you can sort of scheme around that. You always have to be on the watch for Justin Fields or guys like that to take off and run. And it's just an added element. Jimmy Garoppolo's not that guy. He's going to stand in the pocket and he's going to throw the football. You can't really get much more opposite of Justin Fields than with Jimmy Garoppolo. But a potentially good matchup this week for the 49ers. We'll see what happens. Christian McCaffrey going against against Austin Eckler and the Chargers. Should be a lot of fun on Sunday Night Football. we keep coming back to this well, and Jimmy's fine. I know he's not necessarily lights out, but you like this matchup, or you like the situation for Garoppolo this week against LA.
Yeah, it's honestly with Jimmy, I don't even look at the matchup that much anymore. I just look at the fact, I just say to myself, Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, like who has 4 weapons that good?
Mm.
The Dolphins definitely have the top 2 right now going in the league. You know, you could argue that when healthy, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins could make an argument there. But like 4 guys that can attack all areas of the field? I mean, it's like, come on. Like, there's just a huge opportunity. And, you know, if you look at him over the last 4 starts, he's averaging 278 yards and 2 touchdowns passing. Like, let's be honest. That's way more than we're getting from a lot of guys. Like, that's way better than Aaron Rodgers. That's way better than Russell Wilson. That's better than way better than Matthew Stafford. You know, sorry, we keep beating up on those guys every week. Just let it go. But I just feel like there's a real opportunity, and we could. I know we talked about this last week, and we'll see what happens here. But like the 49ers, what would make the most sense is through the bye week, they looked over at Miami and said, you know, they get to the ball to their best players more often than we do. Mm-hmm. You know, they get the ball to Tyreek Hill all the time. They get the ball to Jalen Waddle all the time. They're running the same offense essentially as San Francisco, all the same concepts, except they just don't hand it off as much. They still do the play action. They still go under center. They still use heavy personnel. Kyle, you can still use 12 personnel. You can still make sure you got use check on the field all the time as your fullback. You can do all of those things and still feed all of these guys and get the ball in their hands more. And you don't have to bang McCaffrey between the tackles all the time. So I'm very interested to see if there's a potential change. I think the one thing that could potentially wake a guy like, and Kyle Shanahan's a great play caller, but one thing that could potentially wake a guy like that up is watching like his protege go to Miami and just destroy the league. And if you look down there, the one thing you're going to immediately he's going to see is like, he's just doing the same things as me, but throwing more. And I think Jimmy G could support an offense like that. I don't think you have to be an elite quarterback to do that. That's not a diss on Tua, folks. Sorry, I got people stirred up yesterday unintentionally about Tua. I was just talking about Tyreek Hill, and all of a sudden, you know, you start getting all these mentions, these retweets, and it's like, people finding another way to hate Tua. I'm like, I didn't say anything about Tua. This is not against Tua, so please don't take it that way. I love Tua. I've got Tua in my top 5 this week. You know, just throw the disclaimer out there. So I just think there's some things here to like about Jimmy G. I like him rest of season over all the guys we just talked about at this point.
Well, it's the Star Wars nerd in me looks at this 49ers offense and says this battle station is fully operational, right? Because you've got Christian McCaffrey, who's a couple weeks now with the team, getting acclimated to what they're doing there. Deebo Samuel, hopefully healthy off the bye. You mentioned Ayuk and Kittle. So now, hopefully, this is the week we get to see what this offense can be when it's at full strength. And you're right. Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't have to be elite. He just has to, not screw it up, really, because you just get the ball in the hands of the playmakers and it's going to make you look good by acclamation. So maybe he is. Maybe he is a QB1 that we should be talking about, because I know we haven't talked much about him. If you still have some time in the trade deadline, maybe he's worth, investigating about. Maybe if he's if you're in a shallow league and he's out there, maybe he's worth.
He's out there still quite a bit because the bye week shook him back loose. You know,
that's true.
So, so he's out there quite a bit. I don't know what it looks like today. I know before Tuesday, going into that night with the big waivers, it was there. I'm just waiting to hear Marcus say, "That's no moon. That's a space station."
That's no moon. That's a space station. We might be saying that. Who knows about the 49ers at some point? That space
Pieces
station
are there.
Could be pretty awesome when it's set to go. Saquon Barkley's been pretty awesome all year long. I don't know that we need to dive into this a whole heck of a lot, but it's Saquon Barkley who's been amazing against the Texans, whose run defense has been awful. There may not be an easier decision in fantasy football all year than Saquon as the number 1 RB against Houston this week.
You nailed it. We really don't have to spend any more time. Just quick disclaimer. I mean, it's the Texans. We saw what Derrick Henry ran for over 200 yards when the Texans knew that the Titans could not throw the ball. Like, I mean, I can't remember even how many passing yards Malik Willis had. It was under 70 that game. Like, I think he had 11 or 12 attempts. So if that. So yeah, Saquon is in a really, really good spot. So yeah, just you're going to start him anyway. But this may be
Right.
more DFS thing. He's probably going to be super chalky this weekend, but for good reason. You know, the chalk has been hitting. It
Yep.
drives all of the millionaire winners crazy because they want to play all the contrarian stuff, and I get it. I do the same thing. So it drives me crazy a bit. I don't play as much as they do or have as much invested, so it probably doesn't drive me quite as crazy. But the chalk, like, it's just so hard to fade Saquon Barkley against the Texans. Like, if 40% of people are going to use him, and I get it, like, you should fade him, because if that misses, you leap all these other people. But it's just such good chalk, like, because he gets all the work and it's a terrible
Mhm.
defense. So yeah.
Yeah, sometimes this is an easy game that we analyze, and this feels like one of the easy ones this week. Travis Etienne has become a lot easier to analyze because he has just been awesome for the last couple of weeks, especially once James Robinson was out of the picture. It has become all Etienne all the time. The Jaguars might have to score some points this week to stay in this game against Kansas City. But Dwayne, it looks like it hasn't really mattered what the game script is or what the situation is. This is Travis Etienne's opportunity. And he might just be scratching the surface because I don't feel like he's gotten that much work or has been that efficient so far as a pass catcher. So as good as he is, I think there's still room for him to get better right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I was writing him up for the rankings piece last night, like, that was like kind of my major point. Like, if there's one area that Travis Etienne could improve, it really is in the passing game. And it's something that we kind of expected to be a big part of his game. Because if you go back to his time at Clemson, in his senior year, he was the number one PFF graded running back in receiving grade. So he's shown it in the past. Now, he has not shown to be that down the field operator yet. Like at Clemson, they used him more on bubbles, a lot of motion stuff, get it to him out in the flat, and let him do his thing. So he might not quite be the route runner that we see from some of the elites, like what we expect from Christian McCaffrey, what we expect from Alvin Kamara, even like the Naheem Hines types. So he's definitely a tier below that, but like, he has the skill set, to improve, right? And to continue to get better. His targets per route run sitting at 16%, like, that's below even RB2 levels, like, over the last 10 years, going back and just I've got like this database where I can basically look at different utilization profiles and see how they comp out. But I still think the underlying stuff is there for ETN. So we'll see if he gets more involved. To your point, they are going to be they're big dogs this weekend against Kansas City. As far as everything else, though, like, man, yeah, like 20.9 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. So if you drafted him, and a lot of you folks that are drafting in ESPN and Yahoo leagues, like, you were getting him in the 5th and 6th round of your drafts. Like, it was crazy where he was going. If you play in more competitive stuff, like, you had to spend a 3rd round pick on ETN, and I did a lot. So I needed this, like, personally. So, like, it was a good thing when this turned around. And, we get things wrong, but we care. We want to steer you guys in the right direction. And so, also knowing that I had recommended ETN as a 3rd round smash pick to so many people, and people were really cool about it, but I did have a lot of people coming to me going like, man, kind of like getting the itch. They're like, hey, man, like, when's this ETN thing gonna happen? Like, is it gonna happen? Is it gonna happen? After a few weeks, because he had the passing down work, but to your point, he wasn't getting targeted. And then you had James Robinson still have to work. So all that to say, he looks really good. 80% snap share over the last 3 games. He's just not leaving the field. 78% of the rushing attempts last week. So he is that true every down back, and he's looked really good doing it. I think that is the other important thing coming off the injury. He's the number 5 PFF rushing grade, like, at a 90.6. So that is really good. Missed tackles forced, he's 5th. Average yards after contact, something you wouldn't maybe equate with Travis Etienne. Now, not all yards after contact are created the same. Sometimes a player just has like an arm tackle off his knee pad, and he breaks off 80 yards. That kind of stuff's in there. So you gotta kind of parse through the stuff, but still 16th out of 46 backs that have at least 50 rushing attempts. And then explosive play rate, 14%, which is well above the NFL average. He ranks 12th. So, man, things look good. I've got him as a smash play this weekend. He's a mid-range RB1 the rest of the way. If he does start to get some of that passing work, though, like, we could be talking about a guy that we're like, wow, like, he's scoring points like Christian McCaffrey. Like, that is in the range of outcomes.
I think it's also a good reminder that it is a long season and things change a lot over the course of that. And I know we sort of get in our little bubbles and we look at this week to week. And so if a guy starts off and he has 2 or 3 weeks that aren't great, naturally the concern starts to set in. But look, week 3 was almost 2 months ago. Like, so much stuff changes over the course of the year, and I think we've seen Etienne grow into that role, and Jacksonville sort of help build around him. So that's all. I mean, it's going to happen
It's a
again next
great
year, Dwayne.
point. It's a great point, though. Like we just talked about Justin Fields. What if we had made our final conclusion on Justin Fields after 4 weeks? What if we had made our final conclusion on Travis Etienne after 4? These two guys are helping people win leagues now. Over the first 4 weeks, people were ready to dump them. Justin Fields was getting cut. I talked about it. I cut him. I was getting DMs in smaller leagues of people like, dude, do I just cut Etienne? And I was like, if you can avoid it, like, please don't. Like, just hold. Like, the profile's still there. But to your point, it's a great reminder. And I think, we get, to your point, we get stuck in this bubble. And, we try to do the best we can with the utilization of stuff. And that was screaming to keep Etienne because he had the valuable roles. We just hadn't seen the points yet. But I get it. Sometimes it's hard to have that conviction to hold on. It's like the Wilson Phillips song here.
Right. It's for one more day. Here's the thing. Next year, we're going to do it again. There's going to be some player out there, right? And there's going to be some player out there that gets off to a slow start, and we're going to freak out and wonder if we should trade or cut or what we should do. And then by midseason, that player's probably going to turn it around, and we're going to be like, we should remember to be patient. Like it's.
But I do think it's important on certain profiles. Like Etienne had the passing game work, a former first-round pick. We knew he could be an explosive playmaker, was still getting better off of injury. That's a profile that you got to kind of fade the noise. Justin Fields, a quarterback that we knew had the elite upside as a rusher, even though he hadn't shown it yet. We saw it enough in college. We knew that it meant that the coaching staff needed to make a change, get him involved more. But the underlying profile was there. And I think the other aspect of this is when you stop and think about what you're going to pick up when you drop them. Once you drop a player like that, you're not replacing it with the same kind of profile because typically those are all gone. Typically, those are all on rosters. They just happen to be the ones that are already hitting early in the season. So I think that's the lesson. Like, there's certain kind of players we probably need to be willing to move on quickly from. But then there's others where you're like, man, when they check these kind of boxes, we probably really need to exhibit patience.
All right. So there we go. Take that with you. File this little segment away and keep it in your brain for next year.
Going big.
Dalvin Cook has been just okay so far this year. Just one game with 100 rushing yards. He's the floor has been relatively safe. The ceiling has been fairly low for him. On paper, it just seems like he's playing the Bills. Like, it just seems like a big flashing red sign. But you've got some upside on him. You got a little bit of positivity about Dalvin Cook this week against Buffalo. Explain why.
Yeah, and the first thing, we started to get on this Dalvin train early in the season, you and I. I remember we had a week where we were both kind of like, this is the week. Like, it's going to be the week. I think that's the week he got hurt. Of course, he hurts his shoulder. But he still did fine. But over the last 3 games, like, the utilization, like, is the number one thing. So 87% snaps, 76% snaps, 86% snaps, over 70% of the rushing attempts each of those weeks, over 75% 2 of those games. So really, Alexander Mattison has been relegated back to truly, really just a backup. This is Dalvin Cook's backfield. And when you look at how he's performed, it's been okay. He's not killing you in that stretch. 15.3 points, 25.1, really nice outing, 13.7. But this is the kind of profile right here where you could get, and we're not going to get a Joe Mixon game, folks. Like, you're not going to get another 5-touchdown game. But a 3-touchdown game is just waiting. It is waiting. It is sitting in the wings for a guy like Dalvin Cook. You have a good offense with Minnesota. They're not great. I think they should be better than what they are, but they're still integrating a new scheme, I guess you could say. We're in week 10, probably should have that figured out by now. But having said all of that, like, it's still fine. And then your point about the Bills, when you look at them on paper, they look really good against the run. But the biggest reason for that is they create these huge leads. They get up on other teams, and the other teams just have to abandon the run. But when you look at the underlying data points, it really shows that their run defense, and they've been banged up. Like, they're without one of their linebackers, Milano, right now. They got a couple of safeties that they've been, having to deal with not having in the lineup. But over the last 4 games, a 43.0 PFF run defense grade. That's the 4th worst in the NFL. So even though they haven't given up a lot of rushing yards, they haven't given up a lot of rushing touchdowns, the underlying data says, like, it's there for the taking if a team can just hang in there with Buffalo. This all goes back to Josh Allen's not going to be 100% this weekend, or you're going to get Case Keenum. One of those two things. That makes this a potential situation where the Vikings just are going to have a much better opportunity, in my opinion, Marcus, to keep this game close. And even if they don't, Dalvin Cook still has outs. Like, he doesn't leave the field in the 2-minute. He's played 100% of the 2-minute offense over the last 3 games. That's really been the big development that has sent, his snap share and his route participation, through the roof over the last few games. So I think there's a lot here to like about Dalvin Cook.
I think Dalvin Cook's actually having a pretty good year now, maybe for where you drafted him. The fact that he's kind of hanging around the fringes of the top 12 might be a little bit frustrating, but he's been steady. He's been consistent. He just hasn't had that big blow up game. I'm with you. I don't think that comes this week, but I think, again, you can get a nice, just consistent, solid number out of him. And if the Vikings do keep it close, then there's opportunity for him to actually contribute in the third and fourth quarters of the game on Sunday. The Lions are running the ball effectively. They're not necessarily winning a lot of games, but they got a great matchup against the Bears this week. Jamal Williams has been very quietly putting together a good fantasy season. For him to have success, is it as simple as DeAndre Swift's availability? I mean, Swift was very limited last week to the point that a lot of people were like, maybe he just shouldn't be out there. But for Jamal Williams, is it a case of he eats more if DeAndre Swift is limited this week, or is there more to it?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We've seen over these last several games when you haven't had Swift out there, he's getting like 60% of the rushing attempts. They still have, they've had Craig Reynolds and Justin Jackson rotating in on passing downs. Craig Reynolds got hurt last week. So I think they still want to kind of split Swift's up, roll up in another way. But last week, even with DeAndre Swift back, like, you still saw Jamal Williams in the same role. Really, for the last 2 weeks with DeAndre Swift back, we saw him in the same role. So I think with Swift, like, you just have to be super cautious at this point. Dan Campbell did say that they hope to continue to increase his workload. Heard the same thing from Deuce Staley. They both were very optimistic when they talked about him last week too, though, or at least Deuce Staley was. He was like, hey, we think he's in a spot to get more. No, like, he got less, like way less. So he hasn't hit 20% of the rushing attempts. Well, he hit 27%, the week before last, but he hasn't hit 30% since week 1. So there's something really going on, with his injury. And I think until we see DeAndre Swift get a larger workload, I think the assumption just has to be that you got to kind of treat Swift as, at best, a low-end RB2 with upside. Like, he's still playing some in the passing game, but he even lost some of that. Last week, they really, really limited him. He had been getting at least all the passing down work. But for Jamal Williams, in a game, where you're playing the Bears give up 30.3 rushing attempts per game. That's the most in the NFL. Now, not too long ago, that's the third most in the NFL. Not too long ago, they led the league in that category, but they've been playing better. They've increased their time of possession. They're, doing more on the offensive side, so it's limiting other offenses a little bit, but it's still a really good matchup for Jamal Williams. I mean, if you get 60% of the carries against a team that gives up 30 a week, you're probably going to be in the RB1 conversation. I don't have him there, Marcus, but like, I think he could sneaky have an RB1 game. I think you have to just, I've got him at the low end RB2 range for the week, but he definitely has upside.
With a defense like Chicago that has been vulnerable to the run, and an offense like the Bears have that just wants to run the football, this game could be over in like an hour and a half.
You're right. It could be.
So keep an eye on it. This one may move quickly. Both teams just decide to lean on the run. But Jamal Williams,
Hansen, talking about the witching hour.
Oh, yeah.
The Bears Lions game. After, an hour in.
Right, exactly. You always thought the witching hour, and like Bears and Lions, they've packed up and they're heading back to the bus at that point. Let's look at some wide receivers. Matthew Stafford, which surprised everybody, was announced that he was in concussion protocol on Tuesday. And so we'll see if he's going to be available. I know Sean McVay was trying to put a positive spin on it, but we very well could see John Wolford get the start for the Rams. This sort of seems like what we talked about with Case Keenum in Buffalo to a point, that, Stephon Diggs probably still going to be okay. Everybody else you may want to downgrade or stay away from. Is it the same with the Rams, where Cooper Kupp's going to still be okay? But since we're not really starting any of the other Rams anyway, maybe it's just an easy way to give yourself an out from, trying to pretend to start Allen Robinson or something like that.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to start anything outside of Cooper Kupp, and it's going to downgrade Cooper Kupp. As bad as, the Rams offense has been, we know that Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp are like, they're simpatico. Like, it's hand in glove. Like, they trust each other, on everything. So You're not going to have that, with John Wolford. Now, obviously, he's still the best target. That's who they're going to try to get the ball to. Sean McVay's still going to scheme it up the same way, and maybe Wolford can surprise. Like he's had a couple of spots where we're like, terrible. Like it wasn't good, but it's a downgrade for Kupp. But yeah, I mean, it's just mainly keeping an eye on it. Like I don't even know how Stafford hasn't been ruled out, to be honest. He went into the concussion protocol on Tuesday. Like,
Right.
how's he going to be ready for this game? It's a late game on Sunday. Most people aren't dealing with Stafford. If you're in a super flex league, I would just count on not having Stafford. I don't even know if you can start Matthew Stafford in a super flex. Like, that's how bad it is. But I would just plan on not having Matthew Stafford. We've just seen too many players now, like, get injured on Sunday and not make it through the protocol for the next week. So obviously the league has done the right thing and changed the way the protocols are working. And I just don't see how Matthew Stafford is. I mean, I could be wrong because it's the NFL and it's a bunch of old rich white dudes and they're going to try and do whatever they want to do. But yeah, I don't see Matthew Stafford being on the field.
Well, for what it's worth, I mean, John Wolford did start a playoff game for the Rams a couple of years ago, and they ended up beating Seattle. I don't know that he was necessarily the reason for that, but he has played in some big situations, so we'll see. And you're right. As long as you throw the ball to Cooper Kupp, you're probably going to be okay. So I think he knows enough to do that. From Cooper Kupp to Amari Cooper, who, look, this is one, you want to talk about getting things wrong. I was just apprehensive about Amari Cooper. I didn't know what to expect, especially once we knew it was Jacoby Brissett and not Deshaun Watson starting. I was very hands off. And it turns out he's having a great year, one of the best years of his career in a very funneled passing game. I don't even care about the matchups, Dwayne, with Amari Cooper, just because he has become one of the biggest target hogs in the league, and that alone is good enough for me to consider putting him in the lineup.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. Like, man, he's on pace to set a career high in target share, 28%. And I'm with you. I was wrong on Amari Cooper for all the same reasons that you just talked about. I thought run heavy offense. Jacoby Brissett is not, he's been a journeyman backup quarterback that can play a stopgap and keep you from losing a game. But when, really exposed to the league over a 12-game sample, like typically guys like that don't do well. And credit to Jacoby, like he's proved that wrong. Like he's played really well. He's earned himself, probably another 10 years, making a lot of money in this league. Like if Chase Daniel can hang around, like Jacoby Brissett's got some film to show some people to be like, hey guys, like, I should be playing until I'm 45. Like he's played really well. And then you're going to get the upside of when Deshaun Watson returns. Like if he is in true form, like this is a guy that's been, a top fantasy quarterback, top 5 every year. So with Cooper, it's the target share, like he's looking great. You mentioned the funnel. That is also really good. Like the matchup though, this week, like is really nice because he's dominating man coverage. And this trend goes back for 3 years. Amari has been a man coverage destroyer. Now he has had the occasional cornerback, Stephon Gilmore being one of them, that when they shadow him, for whatever reason, they do get in Amari's head. And I don't know what it is with him. Like, the skill set's there. You've seen him do it time and time again, but all of a sudden he'll just get thrown off. And really, the Patriots do this to him. He had a huge target share against the Patriots earlier this season because they play a ton of man as well. But he only caught like 4 balls off of 11 targets. Like, so he got open. He was getting the targets, but he struggled in a different way. He just got a case of the drops, had some contested catch stuff going down on him. But the big thing with the Dolphins this weekend, they are the number 2 man coverage team in the NFL. They use it on 41% of their plays. Like the league average is like 10 percentage points below that, actually more than that. So this is truly one of those teams that are going to use man covers the most. And also we've seen Cooper whenever he's had Xavier Howard shadow him just recently. Well, I say recently. The last time this happened was in 2019. He posted 6 catches for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. So there is a chance that he gets the shadow coverage from Xavier Howard. And guess what, folks? You don't care. You're actually fine with it. It doesn't matter, to your point, who the matchup is. And the Dolphins, man, like, they stay in man coverage even though they've not been very good at it. Like they are they have actually the worst PFF coverage grade in the NFL at 47.6. So while they're doing a lot of things right down there on offense schematically, they may want to reconsider some things on defense until all their guys get healthy. But yeah, Cooper's an absolute smash play. I've got him in my top 12. Got him as a low end wide receiver 1, but he could be the wide receiver 1 overall on this slate. So love Amari Cooper.
We also like the fact that Miami's been scoring a lot of points. They've been very explosive, and if this turns
Yeah.
into a track meet, then Cleveland's going to have to keep throwing the football to try to stay in it. So even more potential upside for Amari Cooper. Chris Olave in the midst of a great rookie season. I mean, right now looking like the top scoring rookie wideout in fantasy football. I know he's going to score a touchdown in a few weeks, but again, you're talking about sort of a similar situation. Most of the targets are going there. The air yards number has been ridiculous for him so far
Yeah.
this season. So, I mean, again, all
Look,
the metrics,
he had
all
one
everything's in play.
one early in the season. I can't remember, Marcus. Like when he still had Jameis. I want to say like he had like a 300
Oh yeah,
yard
he had
air
like a
yard
300
day.
air yard game. Yeah, it was wild. Like
I'd
week
never
two
seen
or
that.
three, I think it was. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Olave, look, if you look at there's 64 wide receivers in the NFL that have run at least 200 routes so far this season. Here's how he ranks against the entire league, not just rookies. This is how he ranks against the entire league. PFF receiving grade, he's 10th overall at an 81.3. Targets per route run, 26%. That's 7th. I like using targets per route run because he's missed some games. He's been in and out of a couple of games with some injuries. So yards per route run. So that's, targets per route run is, can I demand targets when I'm running a route? Yards per route run is more of an efficiency metric. Like, okay, great, you demanded a target. Are you doing anything with it? 2.38. That is 7th in the NFL. So we've got a rookie ranking 10th, 7th, and 7th, and 3 of the metrics we care the most about when evaluating wide receiver play. He's just a baby. Like, he's a baby. Like, and if you go back and you look at, I did some research this offseason. I'm always looking for new things, to try to add to, kind of my breakout model, like for different positions. And at wide receiver, one thing, and it's funny, like, Jacob Sanderson actually brought it to my attention on Twitter. He was talking about, the 80 plus PFF receiving grade as a rookie, like, and he listed off all the players that had done it. And I'm like, at the time I worked at PFF, I was like, how the hell do I not know this? Number one. And so I went and started researching it, and I dug a lot deeper into it. And wow, like, Jacob was completely right. And if you go look at it, it's a who's list of receivers. And right now, being over an 80, like if the season ended today, he's over that mark. Like, I mean, we are talking over the last 10 years. Like, if I had the list in front of me, I would name them, but I don't. But it's when I name them to you, it would be like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And what's crazy is it caught players that didn't necessarily have big fantasy seasons, even in their first year, but had just enough routes to qualify. Chris Godwin was one of those. Stephon Diggs that identified. He did okay as a rookie. So, I mean, he also scored enough fantasy points, but it caught a lot of different players. So he's hitting that metric. And, Michael Thomas is done for the season. Jarvis Landry, I don't know what's going on with Jarvis Landry.
No
like,
idea.
Limited, questionable, limited. I don't, does he not want to play? I don't know what's going on there. But it doesn't matter. Like, Olave he's the guy. He's the guy on this team. So he's steadily moved his way up. So folks, if you drafted him, like, you're loving it. But he's a high end wide receiver too this week. And he's got a good matchup against Pittsburgh. They're bottom 10 in PFF coverage grade.
By the way, it was week 2. Chris Olave had 307 air yards.
Yeah, I was like, I'd
No
never
one
seen
else,
that.
no one else has hit 250 in a game so far this season.
Yeah.
So he's the champ by a long margin at that. Juju Smith-Schuster playing really well the last few weeks. I don't know if it was just finally getting on the same page with Patrick Mahomes. I don't know if it was them playing Call of Duty as a group. Whatever it is, I'll take it. Does he keep it going this week against Jacksonville, especially when Mecole Hardman is starting to kind of become a thing in Kansas City?
Yeah, it's interesting with Juju. I think you're onto something with just the chemistry itself and timing with Patrick Mahomes, because really with Juju, we've not seen his targets per route run or his target share increase from really what we've seen historically. So, like, he's usually a 17 to 19% targets per route run guy. And I love using that number with Juju because he's had a lot of in and out of the lineups over the last 3 to 4 years, right, with different injuries. So when you go straight target share, if you don't adjust it, right, it's not really telling the true story. So he's right in range with that. He's at 19%. So he's at the high end of what we've seen him do over the course of his career. But the efficiency, the yards per route run, are back up. That's 1.91. So that's the highest we've seen since Juju in his second season with the Steelers. And that's something that you love to see. He's a player that I did draft some this offseason, but I was kind of torn on. I was like, is Juju washed? I don't know. He plays for the Chiefs. He's going to get to play with Patrick Mahomes. He's a guy that broke out as a young player. If there's anything left, like, he's a guy you probably want to be on. So it's interesting, though. When I look at this, I'm kind of torn. Like, what's carrying Juju is the fact that the Chiefs throw all the time. Like a 19% targets per route run in a lot of offenses, you would be like, whoa, like that's a wide receiver 4. But on the Chiefs, it's a low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3. He's out kicking his coverage right now. He's 22.2 points per game over the last 4 weeks. That is the number 2 option, as the number 2 option, behind Travis Kelce, but that's in the top 5 in the NFL for receivers, or top 6. So the Chiefs, though, like they throw the ball all the time, so it doesn't matter. Like 81%, when they're trailing by 4+ points, that's second. The 73% when the game is within 3, that's second. Leading by 4+ points, like this is when a team's really pass heavy. When they're leading the game by 4+ points, they keep throwing. 61%. The NFL average is 50%. They throw the ball 11 percentage points more than the NFL average when leading by 4+ points. So all those things align to he's probably going to be that low end wide receiver 2 the rest of the way. I wouldn't buy into him being a top 12 necessarily the rest of the year, because to do that, like he would need to carve out, a higher target share. And Kelce's still clearly the lead dog. Like Kelce is typically over 25% target share every. Kelce, I think last week, Marcus, I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say Kelce had 17 targets last week. So like the dude he's still the number 1 on the team, but in an offense like this, there's room for, a player not having an elite target share, still coming through and performing, because you also have Patrick Mahomes.
Well, and right now Juju is kind of where I thought he would be at this point in the season. I mean, he's a low end wide receiver 2, just kind of hanging around in that top 20, and it hasn't been pretty the way it got there. I mean, it was kind of a slow start to the season. He's really picked things up lately. So, like Bill Parcells always says, right? Your record is what you are what your record says you are. I think Juju being a kind of fringe top 20 receiver is who he is right now. And that was sort of how I approached him in drafts. And like I said, the roller coaster hasn't always been fun to ride, but we got to about where I thought we would be.
Are
with
you
him.
willing to sell high on Juju? That I didn't put him in my sell high column this week because I was kind of torn, just because I was like, well, it's the Chiefs offense. So like the floor is still really good, because he's basically been what he's been for his career. So the good news, we've already seen the floor as well. Now he had a couple of bad games in there, but if for some reason, like this momentum we've seen over the last weeks, actually some reason turned into now he's getting 23% of the targets, like you would feel bad about moving on from Juju. So I didn't have enough conviction to put him in my sell high, with the trade deadline here. But what are your thoughts on a player like that?
I mean, I wouldn't have a problem selling high. And yeah, the range of outcomes suggests he could stay hot and keep it going. But
Yeah.
I go back to Mahomes at the start of the year, basically warning all of us that they were going to spread the ball around. It wasn't just going to be one guy. And like I said, the last few weeks we've seen a lot more Mecole Hardman. But they've got Kadarius Toney that they still can use and work in some kind of way. I guess there's still people holding out hope that Sky Moore maybe turns into something this year. I don't know, but there are just other places to go with the ball. And, look, Andy Reid is smart enough to know that at some point people are going to kind of figure out one thing and try to take that away. He's going to have other places to go. So, I expect we're going to see some more Juju dips fantasy wise coming up in the next few weeks. So I'm okay selling high on him right now and sort of living with the consequences. That's just me. Couple of tight ends real quick. Greg Dulcich, we've talked about him a few times. I mean, I just love the fact that he's jumped in here and immediately has earned targets. And I don't think there's any real, at least not on my part, any real deep thought about it. It's just that Russ is throwing him the ball, and that's all we want out of a tight end. We just want those chances, and he's getting them right now.
Yeah. He's off to a super hot start, 3 top 12 finishes, in his first 3 games. But the utilization profile also backs it up. So like one of the things people will hear me talk about with tight ends, and it's pretty simple. If a tight end is going to be on the field for over 80% route participation, they are going to have a shot to be a low end tight end 1, period. If they compare that with a 20% targets per route run, they are going to be for sure be a low end tight end 1. And if they are good, as in have some run after the catch ability, can work downfield, not just underneath, have some red zone prowess, which Dulcich is checking all of those boxes, they're going to be a mid-range tight end 1. So it's actually one of these easiest positions, to really project from a straight utilization and efficiency perspective. Like it correlates super highly when you check these boxes, and Dulcich is checking all of them. So I don't, if he's on your wire, like right now, like he was available a ton going in to Tuesday night. There's not many tight ends that I wouldn't drop for him right now. You're not dropping the top names, right? You're not dropping your Goddards, your Kittles, Andrews, Kelsey. You guys don't need me to tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get past that line, and even you're looking at Darren Waller, you're looking at, just because of the injuries. I like Darren Waller. I would still grade Darren Waller as the better one, but I wouldn't blame you if you're just done. You're like, I've had it. I've had it with Darren Waller and his hamstring. I like Darren Waller as a person. I hate his hamstring. You can go that way, but it just looks really good, man. He's the 11th highest PFF receiving grade right now out of all tight ends, 74.4. He has the 6th best yards per route run at 1.88. So that's a minimum of 75 routes. The Titans allow the 2nd most points to opposing pass catchers per game, 66.2 points to opposing pass catchers. You got to divvy that up across Judy, Sutton, Dulcich, but this is one of those weeks where, even if they divided up between 3 guys equally and like they're all at 20%, 22% each, like they could all have decent days against, the Titans, who also give up a lot of efficiency through the passing game.
So Dulcich playing well. Pat Freiermuth, hoping to get some more out of him now. No Chase Claypool there in Pittsburgh anymore. He got moved to Chicago. So one less guy to compete for targets. Freiermuth was really good last year. I mean, in limited samples, but is there hope that maybe he starts to get more work, even with Kenny Pickett kind of struggling there now that there's no Chase Claypool in Pittsburgh anymore?
Yeah, Freiermuth is another one of these young guys that's just looking really good. If you're in a dynasty league, like Dulcich and Freiermuth are guys to be all over. And the thing with Freiermuth, is it hasn't happened yet from the box score. It really hasn't. Neither one of them have had a big boom game in the box score yet, right? Freiermuth had a decent week, but then he had the concussion. He missed some time. It's been spread out. The Steelers' offense hasn't been very good. But his underlying profile, Marcus, you mentioned last year, it looked good, and he's bettered that this year. His targets per route run sitting at 23%, yards per route run 1.82. You go back and look over the history of tight ends to do that in their first or second year. We're talking about names like Zach Ertz. We're talking about names even in the tier above that, named George Kittle, Travis Kelce. Freiermuth isn't quite the athlete as some of those guys, so I kind of like the Zach Ertz comp. But man, we had some huge years out of Zach Ertz. And to your point, Claypool being gone, it really does matter. And Mike Tomlin even confirmed that yesterday. They asked him about how the offense was going to be different, how much they were going to be hurt by not having Chase Claypool in the lineup. And he said, I don't think our offense changes. Claypool, we've got Pat Freiermuth roaming that same area. He's going to absorb those targets. The coach just flat out came out and told us, there's going to be less competition, from a quality player like Claypool from the slot over the middle and underneath. And so Freiermuth, I would expect, who already had a 23% targets per route run, despite having to deal with Deontay Johnson, good player, George Pickens, a 2nd-round pick, and Chase Claypool, who we've seen, as a rookie, he showed us that he had skill. He was still demanding targets. So that is a really positive sign. So that's the kind of player, when you see additional targets open up, you should gravitate to. A lot of times in the industry, you'll just see, oh, so-and-so's out. This other player is going to get the targets. Usually they don't. If they're not good enough to really earn those targets, they may get a game where it's like, oh, they schemed up a bunch of stuff. It can happen. But typically speaking, this is the kind of player you want to go for. So I think Freiermuth, is sneaky. He's the winner of the Chase Claypool trade. And so I think we could see that this weekend. He's also a good guy to go target at the trade deadline. If you can go make a move for Pat Freiermuth, if you're sitting on you've been, twiddling your thumbs, down here trying to figure out between Robert Tonyan and Juwan Johnson and, I don't know, name a couple of other guys, Marcus. I know you probably feel me. Just go get Pat Freiermuth because he hasn't done enough to make him immovable to whoever has him on the roster. But that could be about to change.
And I think it's a good point too. We talk about a player leaving at a certain position, and I think a lot of times we immediately just pivot to somebody else at that position. Chase Claypool's gone. Hey, that's good for George Pickens. It's good for Deontay Johnson. When that's not always the case, because as you pointed out, Freiermuth was kind of doing more similar things to what Claypool was doing in the offense. Obviously, different players, but in terms of where they worked in the field, it was similar. So it's not always a one-to-one when certain guys leave. Last thing before we wrap this one up, Odell Beckham Jr. is back in the news because he's expected to be cleared anytime now. And so the guy who tore his ACL in the Super Bowl looks like he's ready to get back on the field. He just needs to find a team because technically right now he is a free agent. Obviously, Dwayne, a lot of fantasy managers have been ahead of the curve. I see he is rostered in 47% of Yahoo leagues. He's being picked up everywhere just because of that basic news. The rumor right now, though, he could go to Dallas. You're down there. You're a Cowboys fan. Look, CD Lamb has been great. CD Lamb could probably use some help. Does Odell Beckham, do you think he has enough after a couple of injuries, not having played all year long? Is he ready to go, and can he contribute to that Dallas offense? And is he really worth the stash in fantasy?
I think from an NFL perspective, it makes sense, right? Because you still got Michael Gallup recovering, from the injury. James Washington is actually eligible to come off of IR, but he's not necessarily always been, a great player. They've gotten more than they probably expected out of Noah Brown, but Jalen Tolbert, their third round pick, has really done nothing. He can hardly even get on the field. He's not been active very often. So I think from a Cowboys perspective, adding that depth makes sense. But you would need, and this can happen. We just talked about how 4 weeks can look one way, and then 4 weeks later, like, whoa, like, look at this, very different. So this could be a team that could open up the passing game more as Dak gets healthier. If that happened, then potentially Beckham has some value. I just don't see him the way that we used to, last year, a 19% targets per route run, like that's really wide receiver 4 territory. He had a 68.3 PFF receiving grade. Historically, since 2010, I benchmark all these things back to fantasy finishes. And so wide receivers that have had that PFF receiving grade, typically a wide receiver 5. So it's not something where I get super hype about Odell, also because he's coming off the injury. Even once he's going to have to get on a team. He's going to have to acclimate to the offense. And then he's got to get healthy. Like we've seen, even with Chris Godwin demanding all these targets, like it's a struggle for him to put up a lot of fantasy points as he gets back to health. Now, Chris Godwin's way ahead of OBJ. OBJ is going to have to, he's not even to the beginning of getting on the field, having to deal with the injury. And so I just feel like there's a lot of factors with Beckham Jr. Could he end up being someone that we look up in week 15 or 16 and being like, whoa, so glad I've got him on my roster. He's winning me a championship. I think the chances of that are pretty low. Right. I think like the best case outcome is you look up and you're like, I've got 3 receivers hurt. I'm glad I stashed OBJ because I can play him as my wide receiver 3. And there's a place for that in fantasy football, depending on what kind of league that you play in. But he's not a guy that honestly that I'm just going to be holding the candle for, and burning a roster spot over these last several weeks. I would much rather have Terrace Marshall. Like I would take Terrace Marshall 100 times out of 100 over OBJ because he's playing right now. And he's already showing us that like he's improving. He's got second round draft capital. He's potentially got the arrow going up. Odell Beckham Jr. is a player that has the arrow going down. So he's fine. Probably good for the Cowboys. Not someone I'm super excited though for fantasy purposes.
I think the argument in favor is just that the risk is low, right? I mean, you're picking him up off the waiver wire. Whoever you're dropping is probably somebody you weren't playing anyway. Maybe you can still stash him on an IR spot depending on your league format. So I think that's sort of the argument in favor. But I think everything else you said is spot on. I mean, he's just coming off the injury. He is a bit of an older player as well now. I mean, it's not not the same spry young guy that was making one-handed 2-finger catches with the Giants all those years ago. And he's got to find his place to play. He's got to find a way to slide into that offense. There's so many things working against him. And I think the thing we've learned, I think Saquon being an example, coming off that ACL tear, it's not the year back. It usually takes a year to get acclimated and kind of get yourself healthy, fully healthy, and mentally kind of get yourself right after an injury like that. And so I think that's sort of where we are with Beckham. So I get people taking a swing on it. I don't know if I'm going to do that. I don't know if you ever would get comfortable enough to put him in a lineup, but certainly the name is exciting, and I understand people want to get in on that, get on the ground floor of that. Just as a football fan, I want to see Odell back out there again, just because he's fun when he's healthy and he's ready to go. Like he's a fun player to watch. I don't know that we're going to get fully healthy Odell Beckham Jr. in 2022, though. That's kind of it right there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just want to see him on the field because I love him. My son. That's Odell Beckham Jr. is like, that's his favorite player, So like whenever he was getting to the age where he's really old enough to understand football, was really starting to watch it, like that's the player that pulled him into the game. So OBJ will always have a special place. How many times I've had to be in my front yard and my son telling me, Dad, I'm going to Odell it. And you know what that means. I've got to throw the high pass, where he can have the one hand out, like he's falling into the end zone. I got critiqued many times for not having an accurate enough pass, but I told him, like, son, like Odell makes a lot of adjustments in the air to the bad pass. Go watch the big play that you're talking about, and the adjustment he makes. So we had a lot of good times talking through the Odell stuff, and me out there trying not to sprain my elbow, like Josh Allen throwing that ball 100 times every night.
Oh man, well, hopefully we do see Odell back in short order. It should be a whole lot of fun, and hopefully we see the rest of you guys back when we come back for our next edition of the Fantasy Life podcast. Before we go, just a reminder, as always, you can go to fantasylife.com. You can check out the rankings, you can check out all of our different tools, and if you haven't already, sign up for the newsletter. It is 300,000 subscribers strong. You don't want to miss out. Be part of the crew. Like, if we all jumped off a bridge, you should come with us because it's a whole lot of fun. Anyway, that'll do it for this edition of the Fantasy Life podcast. For Dwayne, I am Marcus. Enjoy week 10, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.